you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Not all the figures from my childhood have survived in the years between my childhood collecting and my adulthood collecting. I wish they had. I wish I was able to have all of them, and a good chunk of them have, but when it comes to Legends figures, I've lost quite a few of them. Taking them to school, leaving them on the bus, it's something that I did quite frequently, and I'm not happy about it. Fortunately, that eased off when Revenge of the Fallen hit because I was a bit more careful with them. But a lot of the figures prior to Revenge of the Fallen, I don't have anymore. Or I didn't have anymore until I repurchased them. That caused some interesting circumstances because originally I had this fellow as a child. Universe 2008 Starscream. This isn't my childhood copy, this is a new version I got this year. But that's not the version I had for a good long while because a few years ago I thought I would settle for a different version. I mean, it's the same mold, can't be that much worse, right? I thought I would settle for the Jetfire edition. I thought it would be just as good. But it might have clouded my judgment a little bit. It's an interesting story, and I'd like to take you along and explain how it happened. So how I came by this was, a few years ago I was browsing the Facebook Marketplace, and someone was selling a bunch of Universe 2008 and First movie figures, in the Legends lineup of course. And I had a lot on my checklist that I needed to check off because I'm trying to get one of every mold, and I thought this would be a good way to experience a mold that I had as a child. But it wasn't this version in particular, but I thought at the time, it can't be that bad. And the mold itself is decent, but the colors are most certainly lacking. He does have a lot of paint on show. They've really gone ham on the red paint. You've got a nice kind of outline around the cockpit that goes out and all the way out here. It is done really well. Red is one of the hardest colors to do. You got to put a lot of layers on to get it to work properly, although on white it's not too difficult. But they've done a bang-up job here. The black cockpit works pretty well, and the wings at the back here are also painted quite nicely. The paint applications are really crisp, and you've even got some on the tail fins and the stabilizers here, and oh look at that, they've even molded in a tiny little fake cyber key port. Because of course these are heavily based on their full-sized counterparts. They're basically downscaled versions, so imagine the Zeta aerial bots but done years and years ago at a Legends budget. And of course this one is based on the Thundercracker molds, and it's kind of funny that the most G1 Seeker of course got redecoed into every G1 character possible, even those that weren't originally Seekers. In fact, if you really want to, you could probably use this as a stand-in for Shattered Glass Starscream if you remove the Autobot symbol. Although comparing it with Shattered Glass Starscream, one thing tends to rear its ugly head. The Jetfire color scheme doesn't really work on Seekers. It's a pretty sparse color scheme with red dotted around in sort of similar places to what you'd see on Jetfire, but a Seeker jet has a lot more surface area, so in the end you get stuck with a sea of white. And that's really the primary issue with Jetfire over here. It's just really lackluster in the paint. You look at the back section and there's barely any paint on show. They try with the red at the back here, but it doesn't come across very well, especially with this giant strip of white in the middle here. And there's a lot of detail on show, sure, but it's very hard to see in white as well. There are certain colors where you can get away with not painting it quite a bit, but white isn't one of them. It needs color breakup, it really does. Plus beyond that, the colors at the back just don't match up very well. Well, they match up fine, but they don't look very good. You've got this off-white, almost gray color for the thrusters back here and also the shoulders peeking out here. And I'm okay with the shoulders peeking out, and I'm okay with the thrusters sitting back here in general, but that and the crisp white doesn't really work very well. I get the feeling they were trying to go for that off-white color that Siege Jetfire used, but nah, that toy did it much better. Granted, that was years and years ago, so they didn't have the hindsight for that, but still, this is a pretty lackluster Legends figure. So back then, I was perfectly content to accept that this wasn't the best mold. Nostalgia is a pretty powerful thing, and I thought I was just nostalgic for the mold, and it wasn't as good as I remembered it. But then, Facebook decided to assist again, and I purchased another one. He was selling these separately, but I bought a bunch together. This right here is Starscream, released in the same line, and holy shit, it is the antithesis of Jetfire over here. Now, to be fair, this is a Seeker color layout on a Seeker body type, so of course it's going to work better. But there are a few extra little details here that really bring it to life. For starters, you've got a lovely orange cockpit, and it works much better than the black one on Jetfire. It pops a lot more. Of course, that's very similar to the G1 toy, as are the red parts over here. They sort of mimicked those air intakes on the F-15. Kind of nice touch how they did that with the paint applications. They didn't have to do that, but it's a neat touch. They've also mimicked some of the paint applications with the red strips here and also the red tampographs on the side here. And they've painted these stabilizers at the back here with a lovely blue, and it really pops. And one thing that also pops is the detail, and you know why it pops? Because of the silver plastic used. This silver plastic is gorgeous. I want to see more of this silver plastic on modern toys because it works incredibly well. Like, imagine if they'd used this on Centurion instead of that weird light gray that was just masquerading as silver. You can now see all of the mechanical detail on the wings here, in the center here. You can even see they've now got fake thrusters back here, even though you've got the feet sitting back there that do the same thing, and the feet are in blue plastic along with the shoulders here. So it doesn't look ugly as shit. All around it has less paint apps, but the paint apps they do use work much harder. And the plastic choices really, really work well. And I suppose while I'm here, I should also talk about the underside. It does clean up pretty well. I mean, you've got the feet there, but it doesn't look like it transforms too much. I really enjoy how they've worked in the gun here from the original toy. The kind of ball joint thing is pretty fun. Could tab in a little bit better, but it still works quite well. And this part of the back could also tab in a bit better, but again, I can hold up the sign. And also, it is a pretty old toy. This came out in 2008, so I don't really expect it to be as good as many of the modern Legion class figures. So it just goes to show what a good deco can do to a figure. A mediocre deco can make a toy seem mediocre, but if the toy is good on its own merits and it's given a good deco, you can realize what it truly is. Deco design is just as important as engineering design and mechanical detail design. You need a good deco to make a good figure actually seem good. Now for size comparisons, they are 7 centimeters wide and 9.8 centimeters long. And of course here they are next to a standard Legion figure, a standard Core class figure, a standard War for Cybertron Micromaster, and Crumbs. And of course with the transformation, much like the two modes themselves, it is heavily inspired by the full-size toy. It is nigh identical, just with a few simplifications. Now it does have this bit that opens up to make the transformation easier, but it's really just a redundant piece. He transforms just fine without it. But anyway, the first thing you want to do is come around to the bottom and rotate the gun out of the way. It's on 2 different ball joints and kind of just rotates into place. Sadly, the arms don't clip into the wings. That's something I would have really liked, but it still works. The legs aren't that solidly pegged into place, but the waist section is, so you just want to untab the waist from there. And the waist is supposed to peg into the nose cone there, but again, they didn't really think that through. That's my main gripe with this transformation. There's not a lot of locking tabs, but I think I can cut it some slack because of the age of the figure. We're not dealing with modern Legends engineering. These are very, very old Legends. Fortunately, it does remain locked in solidly because you've got 2 tabs there, and instead of them tabbing in here, they tab in here. And as you do that, along with the nose cone on the double hinge, it becomes nice and solid. And we're almost done. Just bring the feet out like that, and it's good. Scaling down large-scale transformations doesn't always work. A lot of the time, as was seen with the hybrid-style figures, it can work really, really poorly. But since the Cybertron toys were fairly simple in nature, I feel this is a good example of it. It's one where it didn't go to shit. And once again in Robo mode you can see where one example and one deco worked really well, whereas the other did not. It is pretty much chalk and cheese in terms of how well they were done. It's just crazy how much of a difference a good deco will do here. Starting off with Jetfire, they've made some really weird deco choices. They've put red paint on the back wings here when it gets covered up by the gun, but they've got nothing here except the black missiles, so you don't really get much color breakup. The head's got a lot of paint with a blue crest and white paint on top of it, and blue eyes and a grey face, but it just doesn't pop because it's surrounded by a sea of white with a big bulbous grey hinge on the top there. Just the Jetfire head colors don't work on this figure. And now you've got the off-white on show here, which just does not look good at all. The only real color breakup you've got that really does anything is the red and the black on the chest and some weird blue on the thighs. Why did you put the blue on the thighs? Couldn't you have saved it for the rest? It just doesn't make any sense. And one thing I've noticed on this copy is that when you try to move the legs, it untabs the backpack. That's not really a thing on the Starscream version. It could just be this copy, or it could be mold degradation. I'm not sure, but it's something I dislike about this figure. One thing that makes no sense and is quite hilarious is that they've painted the sides here red to mimic the thrusters on the sides of the legs of Jetfire, and it's funny but pointless because you don't see them from the front. Just, it's a lackluster mold with warped priorities about what they needed to do. They prioritized G1 references over actually making it look good. They could have done these parts in red and it could have looked amazing, but no, they had to make it look like a G1 toy because that's what Universe 2008 Legends redecos were doing. Well, this one in particular, not most of them. And sure, if you really want to use him as a stand-in for Shattered Glass Starscream, he can kind of work, especially in this mode, since there's no Autobot symbol on show, but I still wouldn't recommend it. It is lacking, even more lacking than the full-colored Starscream over here. Although, weird thing about this, I've noticed it started to yellow, which is incredibly odd because I've left this in storage out of the sunlight after all this time. And it's only been, what, like 2 months since I got it, that is really concerning. But yes, if you're a massive fan of Shattered Glass Starscream, yeah, it kinda works. But only because no other company on the planet has made a Shattered Glass Starscream in the Legend scale at this time. So I might in the future, but for now we don't have any. This is the best bet. But for now, I just don't see any point in getting it, especially when, if you want to sample the molds, there are much better decos. Like, you take a look at Starscream, and the color breakup with the blue already does wonders. His chest no longer looks thin as because it actually has definition. It goes inwards and it goes outwards. When you move him, he doesn't fall apart because the joints are far tighter. There's a bit of flex on the plastic, but not a lot. You've now got definition between the gun and the rest of the arm. It actually looks pretty cool. Also, can I just say how awesome this gun is? It's just such a cool concept, fitting into the arm and giving the Legends figure a weapon. Of course, if you don't want it, you can just pop it off. It works fine, but I like to leave it on anyway. The head sculpt actually looks good now because it was designed for Starscream. Not as much paint, just a bit of black paint on the helmet and some red paint on the eyes, but the red pops way more. And the blue hinge doesn't look as obnoxious at the back there. You've got red paint on the missiles on the wings, much like the black paint on Jetfire's missiles there. However, unlike Jetfire, these are actually further out, so they don't get covered up by the gun a lot of the time. And once again, you can actually see a lot of the surface detail on the legs now that they've got the silver on show, as well as the wings when you move the arms out of the way. Just, that's a lot of detail there. And the thighs don't look stupid because they don't have thrusters on them. Those aren't thrusters, that's just thigh detail. What the f are you doing, Jetfire? Also, no silly paint down here that you'll never see. They've just done this properly. Now, if you really want to mimic these shoulder pauldrons that Starscream has, you can move this down at the back and kind of get it from the front. But that doesn't really look good because that's now sticking at the back. I guess you could take that off, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'd prefer to just leave it up like that. But hey, it is an option if you so desire. Just, this design looks really good. What can I say? It's a wonderful little Legends Starscream. Probably not as good as the Reveal the Shield version we got later, but still pretty good for the time. Now, for his articulation, he has ball-jointed shoulders and ball-jointed legs. You can kind of move the feet inward, but it doesn't really do much considering he's got no backward motion since he's got pretty much his entire alt mode on his back, which might be considered lazy to some people, but come on, I can pull up the sign for that. The gun also moves around on 2 ball joints, but that's not really articulation, that's just transformation joints. Now, for sizing, he is 7 centimeters wide, much like the vehicle mode, and in terms of height, he is 8.5 centimeters. And for some comparisons, here they are next to a standard Legion figure, and yes, some downscaling has happened over the years, but the engineering has gotten better as a result, so I can't really complain. A standard core class figure, a standard War for Cybertron Micromaster, and crumbs. I am incredibly glad I came across Starscream all of these years later. With Jetfire, I was willing to accept that the mold wasn't as good as I remembered it, but apparently it was, because a great deco can bring a mold to life. I don't think I need to hunt down every version of this on the aftermarket, because these aren't even the best Cybertron Legends figures on the planet. Cybertron molds, that is, because I know they're Universe 2008. So my point is, I think that's enough versions for me, since we've got way better Cybertron Legends figures. Hell, they aren't even the best Cybertron Seekers on the market. There are far better ones in the Legends scale. But for what I got, I am very content. They're definitely one of the better ones that Hasbro released in the time period, whether back in 2005 or in 2008 to coincide with the Classics Renaissance. What I mean to say is they've done a good job, just avoid this version, because it's not worth it. This really goes to show just how important a deco is on a figure. Just as important as the engineering, really. A great deco can make a mediocre toy seem like the best thing on the planet. In fact, that's kind of what happened to Bale, if you think about it. And that's happened again. This figure does have problems, but in the end, the Starscream version rocks. The old version is neither here nor there. You can just kind of skip it. It's a bit boring unless you're a massive fan of Shattered Glass Starscream, in which case knock yourself out. But Starscream, he's got genuine quality to him. The paint is great, the joints are tight, everything works really well. Just, what can I say? Great deco for a pretty good figure. And definitely one of the better Legends from the Cybertron lineup. A lot of them had their problems, but this one really knocked it out of the park. And on the topic of knocking it out of the park, tomorrow I want to take you on a special journey. If there's one video I want to remake, it's this one in particular. Tomorrow we discuss, bar none, the best Legion class figure Hasbro has ever released. And I mean that without hyperbole, because this thing is awesome.